this? Hello and welcome to the stream. I'm trying out what the auto start feature does, and it's kind of doesn't work quite as I would have expected. My assumption was that it would well, mostly on the OBS side, I would assume the go live would also be darkened like start streaming is, but for some reason it doesn't do that. It's probably just because more of an indication of pressing the button, so it doesn't get the feedback from YouTube side to change it because it doesn't really need to. But anywho, welcome. Today, my plan is to continue this world that I started almost 2 weeks ago and haven't played since. And talk about a light novel whose name is long, and I believe it is min-maxing in a TRPG world, or min-maxing Trpg Build. Have it written in the description because it's far too long to actually memorize the exact phrasing, because like just about every light novel, the name is pretty mediocre. Like, they could definitely name them better, or like, I don't know if it's a facet of translation. I assume it isn't, but it's still the case that at the very least the English titles for basically every light novel that is in the style of like basic light novels, and like, not, I don't know about, you know, actual, no offense to these ones because I enjoy reading them, like high quality novels probably have actual names. Actually, yeah, there's examples that I have not read. Oh, that's fine. That I can think of, like, I don't know if it's a manga or a light novel, but there's like something about a seventh box, or I believe, and that the title doesn't say much about what the actual story is, which isn't actually an issue, because that's how most books titles are. They aren't just a full sentence being used to describe the topic of the book, which is a major trend in like fantasy, isekai, generic web novels turned light novels, that it's kind of a negative, but also it's not really that bad, because it's not a deal breaker for reading a story. I just think when it's not a joke, it's just kind of, it makes it so that you never really want to say the name out loud, because it's just ridiculous almost always. But back on topic, the book, I've been reading it over the last, I don't know, 6 months to a year. I can't remember when it started being translated to English, but I've been reading it, I've been keeping up to date, and it's probably one of the top, it's probably in my top 10 light novels from an entertainment perspective for me, because it has a premise, it works within the premise, and it doesn't lean, I think, too hard on just directly applying tropes and like being filled with tropes. It still has many tropes, but it doesn't try to play it off like it is totally new, which is useful. But my goal today is not to speak and make like a mediocre attempt at reviewing it. My main intention is to just sort of talk about what's happened up until now, where it's been released, like what has been translated until now, and talk about what within the story appeals to me the most, and just the characters, and why I enjoy it. But I mean, one thing that I can start with is, like, not as a positive, but just as a general statement. As a story, it definitely does lean into a few fairly common, like, tropes and character types that from most, I would say, Western story perspectives are kind of questionable. They're not terrible, because it's never overly positive about them, but, and I won't specifically label them, because if you've ever read these types of things, there's some that you definitely recognize, but it is also, it's the type of, it's not on the level of anything that, within the context of anime and light novels, it's not anything that would be thought of as even particularly bad. It is just sort of fairly common concepts, so while it is abnormal, and I would never want to actually talk about it with, like, people who aren't directly accustomed to these types of stories, I would nonetheless say that it's not bad, so it's fun to read, and it doesn't hinder the story. But now, what I will now start just what I wanted to talk about, which was just the characters, how the story is told, and the tone of the story, because those are to me some of the most important parts. With when, oh, I actually should have thought about this, huh? Because this is a big thing that I just cleared. Okay, that's gonna be a pain. But the big thing that is most appealing about it as a story is, like, both the characters and the, I'm gonna call it a power system, like the way that strength and abilities are quantified are, to me, actually this is one short, isn't it? Oh well, too late. The way it is quantified following tabletop role-playing game, like, concepts is a very appealing one to me, because tabletop role-playing games are, like, like, even in a non-planned out story, they're a great method for telling a story. And while part of what is appealing about them is, like, improvisation, the power to just make stuff up as you go, which is lost in a planned and written story. Though this is a web novel, so that has been transferred to a light novel, so it's not quite gonna be as planned as some books might be. But the inherently flexible nature of role-playing games, while not being completely flexible, because when you're playing an RPG, the main reason to have rules is to provide boundaries so that it doesn't devolve into basic kids playing outdoors saying, "Oh, I can do this thing that completely nullifies your power or your attack," and then back and forth. So the rules are important, but the rules are never perfect, because nothing of this type is gonna be perfectly balanced. Maybe people making these games will try their best, but often, if they want the system to be as free as like generally free form as possible, it will leave many potential like vulnerabilities to like to abuse points of the system. And this light novel does a good job highlighting that element of that many people find appealing in tabletop role-playing games, which like it's in the title. It's all about like the main character is all about min-maxing, which is, you know, a common thing to do in role-playing games. And it's even more realistic that they would min-max because their life is on the line, which admittedly within this story is a little bit their character's own fault, but yeah, that the premise works well for the type of story that's being told. But now to what I actually meant to talk about, which was just the characters. I find that the initial set of characters and their introduction is a fairly compelling way. Like, it does a good job of making you care at least a little about them, because the main character is introduced obviously at the start. They're living their life. It very much falls into the like broader like sort of hero's journey type. Oh, he's a nobody, literally growing up on a farm, which is common as an introduction to these types of characters. But it's both played totally straight, but since it's a type of story that is clearly aware of these tropes, it's clear it doesn't feel tacked on. It is simply just a straightforward starting point from which everything can grow. It does, like, stories do not require the main character to have some wonderful upbringing, just as it doesn't you don't really need them to have a farm boy upbringing. Like, it serves the purpose of getting the character introduced and establishing their relationships with those around them, and that's all that it really needs. But as part of this, you get the character growing up and how people view them as they, you know, deal with the classic, you know, isekai, oh hey, I know far more than everyone else, but I feel that in this story does a better job than many of dealing with that by just having the character, like, they don't fully pretend that they aren't good at what they're good at, but it doesn't do the frequently used attempting to hide that they are better than they are and then failing because of their own incompetence or bad luck. It doesn't lean into that. But that means that the main character is just who he is. He has... I think there is only really one actual friend that they make in this initial bit who is, unsurprisingly for this style of story, well, at the start they're a girl, but they are, well, no, I think even at the point the story is now, they would technically still be a girl, but going by age, like, if they're 14-ish, I think you would still call them a girl instead of a woman. I'm not sure. That's not a cut and dry concept, and not actually relevant, but it's a girl. That's how these types of stories go. And while this is also played very straight, it's just setting the pace. And like, since the main character's entire driving force, what drives them is to become an adventurer, it makes sense that in this world they would simply be like, they would have a mundane upbringing that leaves it open for them to become an adventurer, because as I believe they're the fourth son of a farmer, they might be the third, not very memorable, because it's just a background, basically. They're free to do basically whatever, because they're not going to inherit the farm. They would have to find work somewhere else anyway, so they can become an adventurer. It all serves the purpose of adventure. And so, unsurprisingly, I think the only potentially unique component of this initial segment of the story is the fact that, and this is a spoiler, it's not a huge spoiler, it's a spoiler for the first book, which is a few hours reading, but if you don't want a spoiler, don't listen for a bit. But like, they have a sister, they get a sister, their sister is, born, they're weak, they struggle, the brother helps them a great deal, and they live, but it's eventually revealed that they are a changeling, which is a common, not very common, but like, there's multiple different interpretations of changelings that have, I think, existed, but this interpretation I think, sticks with one of the original concepts, where it is a fairy, or in the case of this story, an alfar, who is, in this story, they took the place of the child, though I think it's mostly the case of the child itself did not exist without the alfar, creating the baby, sort of. Like, the specifics aren't overly examined because that's not the key point, but like, they're not human. That is it is probably the single most important plot point for pushing the story forward, because if their sister was just a human, everything that follows in the next, like, 4 books, maybe even 5 books, would be entirely different. And it's a key element that pushes the story in the direction that it goes. And I think the fact that it is the way the changeling is a fairy spirit who just wanted to experience the joy of, family that humans, or in this story, mensch, have. It's something that is that to a certain extent, it is a relatable idea. If you've never had a happy family, the idea of you see many people with happy families and wanting to experience that, it's sad, but it's also kind of happy that they eventually got their wish, because they were fortunate to be the family that they chose, because they chose the family because they were a loving family. And like the fact that it mostly worked out is a nice story. That's probably the single most important character trait, other than the main character. It's like compulsion for adventure within the first book. Like, I guess another part related to the Alfar is that it is established that they like young boys and girls, young children, because they're, fairies and stuff, which are all frequently, they steal children and that type of stuff, and that is what they are in this story. They steal children away to dance on a Twilight Hill forever. Which I think it's established that going there, doing that, eventually turns them, the children, into Alfar, potentially. So it's an element of the story that is mentioned, it is often brought up, and the main male character has blonde hair, so they're a pretty boy, so the Alfar are interested, and this introduces multiple characters who are relevant because they are Alf and they help, but in a later book, as they grow older and as the other Alfar lose interest in them, it is eventually established that the ones who have stuck with them aren't simply, oh hey, it's a pretty young boy, and not in a odd way, it's just they're, fairies, and fairies are attracted to, not in a weird way, but like fairies are drawn towards young, energetic people. Okay. And that's sort of a very relevant part of the story. But this a major part, I think at the end of the first book, or end of the first book, start of the second book, a new character is introduced because, like, as a result of an incident arising with the sister. A new character is introduced, which also, alongside it, introduces a new race of peoples who are Methuselah, I think would be the pronunciation, and they're immortal beings who don't need to eat, sleep, drink, anything. They're basically like the ultimate being, because they can live forever, even if they just sat around every day. And they're just better at magic, better at basically everything, which is it's a lame concept if it were like not played as just a character type to establish, but I think within an established world it works well. Kind of like, I believe, the elves in the Lord of the Rings, they're immortal. I think it's obviously based on elves, but like the elves in the Lord of the Rings, they're immortal, but they're most of them, I think my understanding is they're like finicky. They're not connected with the world and the other peoples of the world, and they're withdrawn. And that, not the same thing, but every Methuselah is is entirely self-involved. They only care about what appeals to them, which can change relatively readily, but it seems like most pick something that they like the most, and that's what they spend their eternity doing. And then I think eventually some may grow bored, or they die of other reasons, but they can live forever, but due to the nature of living forever, they might grow bored. Which is, I think, it's a very appealing character type, even though I don't believe it's wholly unique, but it's just a fun character to have in the story, because the character that is introduced, who ends up taking a role of teaching the younger sister due to their specific circumstances, they start teaching them, and this leads to the next set, like 3 or 4 books plot. And it's a very interesting, I feel, character, because she is established as lazy is not quite the correct word, but there's a word that is explicitly used to describe her that is much better than lazy, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. But it's, well, kind of what I can say is that the reason she decides to take the sister, well, part of the reason she decides to take the sister as a student is because she was forced to leave the schooling institution that she technically worked or researched for, because she spent several years cooped up in a library just reading, only doing the bare minimum of other work that she was required, and so she had to be sent out. And because she's not wholly lazy, but she only wants to satisfy her own desires. And this type of person wouldn't usually be like, hey, I will teach this person, but that's their only ticket back, so they took up the job. Eventually, the character is still very self-centered, but it does eventually become clear that they do, in their own way, care about their student and new servant in the main character, who's, because they're just a farming family, they can hardly pay tuition for I think it's mage is the relevant term here, because mage and sorcerer are used. Mage is someone who has properly learned how to do magic, and the tuition was far more than they could ever possibly pay, so he took up a role as her servant and works for her for several books. And it's made clear relatively quickly that she, as I said, cares for them in her own way, which is, it's not totally unique, but it's always kind of a heartwarming type of story when the person who is doing their best, or like a connection to reality, is like if a cat or a dog that's usually trying to be standoffish, staying away from you, is willing to, or begins to show affection, you feel good. It's like, oh, they're nice, they don't hate me, and so it's a character type that has that sort of appeal because it's when they start out self-centered, not apathetic, but they don't care for anyone. It's when they eventually reveal that their emotions, it is nice. It's never revealed totally that clearly, but it's fun character, not really growth, but like characterization. But yeah, she's a major character. She gets the main character into a great deal of trouble through just having him do stuff. But without that, the story would have been. I mean, obviously the book wouldn't have been the same. It would have changed in a different way. But in a hypothetical world where this was reality, the character story would have been totally different. He would have met a far smaller group of people, and he wouldn't have. I believe he wouldn't have ever actually attained any level of skill with magic, which becomes a relevant plot. It becomes a plot relevant point because without magic, his style of combat would be different. Well, that's not really plot relevant, but it is still a relevant story, and it would have all developed differently had she not taken in his sister for instruction. But yeah, this character, Lady Agrippina, I think would be the pronunciation, is like. Actually, another thing that I can mention is how at the end of every book, an alternate story, like basically if things had gone differently, here's something that could have happened, is told. And in one of those, it's made fairly clear that she is attached to him. From a reality perspective, it would be very, very weird. But in fiction, it's not especially, because once there's beings that live forever and only actually care about themselves, and any it has less impact. But it's also one of the anime, manga, light novel things that you just kind of get used to. But it's also not even unique to like Japanese, Korean, Chinese stories. There's at least one Western novel that I can name that has a significantly longer lived character getting together with a significantly shorter lived character who had originally met them as a child. I'm actually lost. I don't know. Must be down one of these, right? Must be here. No, definitely not there. Okay. Definitely not there. I somehow got myself lost, but that's an important character and an important plot line. Okay, so this is where I am. But I need. I shouldn't die from here. But that's an important character from the start of the story. And this eventually, the character has a bit of an adventure on the way to the capital, some stuff that is relevant occurs, but not the most long-term plot implications. And then they eventually, you know, reach the capital, adjust to life a bit, and the plot, progresses. They meet, I think the first new person they meet that is named is like a wraith, who is within this story, which I think is also common in like D&D type settings. A wraith can be generated when a sufficiently, I should actually plant saplings, a sufficiently powerful mage or wizard in D&D context. When a sufficiently powerful mage dies and has enough like drive, will to keep them sustained, and so they become, a ghostly wraith, which I think the wraith in this type of story is basically, I think it's more or less a D&D lich, minus having like a phylactery in which their soul is stored. Like, I don't think the wraiths in this have their souls stored in a crystal or book or anything. I think they just exist in the same way anything does. But that is a character that's introduced. They're relevant, and they strongly fall under the category of types of characters that are pretty normal in a lot of this style of anime and manga, but in reality are pretty, extremely reprehensible. But since like their reprehensible traits are not actually played up as positive, and they don't, do anything overly bad, they're not at least within the story, they don't appear as a terrible person. They do appear as a creepy person that the main character wants to be very careful around, but they'd never really step into a territory that within the story's world would be problematic. But that character is relevant, but they're not the most important individual. One character that's, I think the next important character that's introduced is someone who's studying at I think it's technically an academy, but it's more of a university, so I can't remember the specific terms used, but they are from the north, and they're a different species of, I think they're generally referred to as human folk, of basically they're humans, but every different group of human folk has genuine differences, and this character is from a group of people who are like based on the cycle of the moon, I think they shift between either being male, gender neutral, or female, which kind of has a fun reason to exist, where like they, in the same way like clownfish are able to change genders depending on necessity because of these people's, where they lived, which was like the cold and forbidding north. This is just how they evolved. And I would say I don't believe the story goes anywhere that is, like, the character's not portrayed in a negative way. they're portrayed as someone who is treated poorly. So I imagine, and like I think the most important part is the character is just a person. They live their life. They have their own struggles because of who they are, but no, there is nothing about them that's like, oh, this is a negative statement about real transgender people. It doesn't go into that too much in a way that I think could potentially be an issue. It also might be positive the way they're portrayed because they are just a person, which I am not personally knowledgeable enough, but anyone who is transgender or whatever, they're just people. They have their own struggles due to other people treating them poorly, but they're still just people. So since this character is just a person, there are elements that are maybe a little weird, but not in that specific way. It's just kind of, it makes sense that if someone genuinely shifts back and forth every month, that the physical differences, the hormonal differences might influence them. And like, it's kind of an interesting premise, but it's not overly stressed, which I think it's a good way to handle. I think it does a good job of just, they're just a people, they have struggles because of this, and that's just kind of what it is. They don't, I don't know what the optimal height is, let's go 50. The author doesn't dwell on it in a negative way. Yeah, it creates a kind of interesting character because as the story goes on, it's like, oh, when they were a boy, they were in favor of like things that would commonly be guys are into this, and then when they're a girl, they're like, hey, this was a bad idea. And that I think lends to a kind of, it has potential for very minor kind of fun moments, but it's not a major point of the character. They have their struggles, but they're also, they have their own issues that they would have even if they were just another mensch. Yeah, that character's introduced. There's a fun, in the second or I think it's, no, it might be third or fourth book, there's a fun tree person that shows up briefly for a quest. It was kind of fun. Then there is, actually, one part of the story is that there are a great many different groups of peoples. There are different, like there's like Arachne as a race of people or monsters, which in this case they're people because they're not mindless monsters as they can be in some stories. What's fun about them is that there are different varieties. There's like, I think, orb weavers, there's jumping spiders, and then there's one or two, I think there's either one or two other types. But like, one of the potential iffy things that is common in manga and anime is the jumping spiders. Because if they want to be able to jump, they need to be small. And that's all I'm saying on that topic. But it's a fun collection of these types of, I guess it's demi-humans, is a common term in these types of stories, where they're half human, half something else. And the story has like the Arachne type thing, which is fairly common, but it also has a group of people who are like part centipede, which is pretty fun because that's not nearly as common as, say, like Lamia, but specifically snake-tailed Lamia type. Which, on that note, apparently I've been reading or looking at bestiaries from Pathfinder 2E, they're fun to look at, and I don't know if it's specific to Pathfinder. My assumption is not, but there are more types of Lamia, or Lamia, I don't know the pronunciation, than just snake, like people with legs replaced with snakes. And I wish it was more used as a concept, because if I could find the page that had them, yeah, like the Lamia in the Pathfinder 2nd edition bestiary, there's like a Lamia with what looks like a lion body for their legs, as well as the like Lamia with a snake instead of legs, which I think is kind of, well, it doesn't need to all fall under the same term. It's a more interesting concept, I think. Yeah, so like the bestiary entry itself is they are victims of an ancient curse. Most Lamias are humanoids from the waist up, but have the lower bodies of beasts or monsters, which I think it being more extended than just snakes is kind of neat. But that all depends on whether that is something that Pathfinder specifically did, or if it's something that's more broadly used as a concept in I think, just searching really quickly, it looks like okay, there are different types of Lamia. There is, ooh, apparently Lamia is an animal in New Guinea that is a tree mouse. Interesting. And it's a genus of beetles. Cool. But, so the term Lamia, primarily stemming from Greek mythology, I think might specifically be related to snakes. Uh, da, da. Though looking at the Wikipedia entry, it doesn't appear to completely specify that they're just a snake. Yeah, so it's changed over time, the interpretation, but some depictions and interpretations seem to not just be a snake-legged. But that's interesting. I didn't learn that. But yeah, having the fact that this light novel has many different groups of people is, fun. I think in a fantasy world, you might as well have dozens upon dozens of different, sapient, sentient, human, demi-human people that aren't just, the same as normal Earth humans. Like, having people who are half centipede is something relatively unique. I don't know if it's wholly unique. There's almost certainly a bunch of, I don't know, mythology that already has them, but it's not as overdone within light novels as stuff like Arachne and Lamia and centaurs, which admittedly the story also has a centaur that shows up eventually. Although they aren't actually centaurs. For some reason they're Zentaurs with a Z. There may be a reason, I don't know. Though there is also, it also references a centaur type species that is camels instead of horses. Which, that one I feel like definitely existed before, but having those simple, slightly different versions of well-known mythos is fun. It adds a little bit of extra flavor to the world. But yeah, that I got to the introduction, different characters. I talked briefly about the not centaurs, but I got to how there's people who are half centipede. There are also vampires who are fairly, I would say, mundane by vampire standards, except for the fact that the, I guess, mythos surrounding them is a little different, because it's within the own worlds, they have to establish it at least a little differently. Like, the vampires within this story are established as the descendants of a man who tricked or stole from the god of the sun, hence the common burning up in the sun side effect for vampires. But as part of their history, they were helped by the goddess of the moon, which, fits with vampires being creatures of the night. And so the vampire who is talked to the most within the story thus far, they are part of the church of, the night mother or the mother of the night, whatever. And it's not just an old, vampires fear crosses. They are potentially very religious in their own way, which adds an interesting potential. They are just different types of people, which is, I think, a compelling, I guess, species to introduce to a story, instead of just having them all be creatures of the night out to suck your blood. Having them just be people living their own life is interesting. And yeah, I think that's one of the things I think this story does the best, is how it it does strongly play into like fairly common harem tropes. I don't know the pronunciation. I've read it in books, but I've never actually heard it said out loud. Apologies. But like playing into those type tropes of like basically every book or every storyline introduces a new female character for the male lead to interact with and inevitably seduce through their actions. Which, like, it's kind of lame, but within the story it's not the biggest element because the main character is explicitly already taken by their friend from childhood. He already has promised to like adventure and get married and all that. Of course, that's not how it's gonna just end up. It's probably gonna be something with all the people that he's met. It's gonna be something's gonna happen. It might just be that they respect his, choice and it all works out like that, which would be nice. But I have no idea how that's gonna go eventually. But the story uses this characters introduced to be seduced by the main character as a way to introduce the different peoples of the world. Like, the first one is the jumping spider, arachne person. The second is the Tavisco, which is a person that swaps genders at a regular interval. The third is a vampire. I think the fourth is probably a centaur. I think that's the order. I don't think there's anybody. Like, I think that's the order the characters were introduced. And I don't think there's anyone I'm missing, but like, oh no, there's the half centipede girl. Who, I think it's not totally unreasonable to set it, like the character that was generated about her being very aggressive, but like physically aggressive, like playing off of what is often a trait in insects of eating, well, there are many types of insects and such that eat their mates, and so it's sort of playing into that. She is very aggressive, which is it's a fun joke, I think. She hasn't shown up since the last time. Well, obviously she hasn't shown up since the last time she showed up, but she was the main new character from the last story arc. And she has not, like, the main character has not thought of her because they fought, they were enemies, so he won. And while he had to interact with her afterwards, she's not on his mind at all, based on what is written. That could easily be established that he'd been thinking about them a bunch, but as of what I've read, it doesn't seem like that. But yeah, that's it. The story uses the common introducing a new character with every arc for the main character to woo. It uses it as an effective way to introduce the various peoples of the world, and I think that's a good use of a common trope, because like fleshing out the world is an important part for this type of story, whose primary emphasis is on just like the fundamental appeal and interest in adventuring. Like, this story is an adventure. That's first and foremost what it's all about. And I find it's a fun read because while there are moments that are potentially serious within the setting, it's always it's very unlikely that the main character will ever be absolutely and utterly emotionally devastated or some super serious thing like that within the main story. Within the uh, hypothetical stories, it's already the case that there's I think the second, or yes, the second hypothetical story, he took a gift from the Alfar, he became an Alfar, and he doesn't have, at that point, he does not have the capacity to regret or think about it in the same way as he would have as a person, but he reaches a point where if he still had his original human or mensch sensibilities, he would probably be absolutely devastated. But that is in a hypothetical story that is simply, this is how stuff could have gone. So because of those, it feels very clear that the story, the main story, will never take a hugely serious negative turn, because that having the main story be stuff works out in the end, even if there's struggles along the way, having it so that it all works out in the end, is the story that you want to see. Because of these splinter stories told at the end of every chapter, or at the end of every book, these stories are told. The main story has to continue in a way that leaves more interesting potential side stories, because if it's looked at as every, like, the whole multiverse concept where every single thing that could happen does happen but in a different timeline, different universe, the one universe that we followed for the main story kind of is required to be the one that goes the furthest, that is the happy ending potentially. And I'd be shocked if that isn't how it goes. I'll be surprised, and it would be a major twist if the story ends, or if partway through the story his, like, loved childhood friend dies out of, like, nowhere. That is the type of thing that I feel is most, like, if it ever gets that serious or dark, it would be within the side stories, which allows for those potential negative, dark storylines, the dark timeline type things, while allowing for a happy and almost everything goes well main story. And I like that. It's the, like, the alternate stories, I think, do a great job of expanding the world while allowing for, like, it means that, because it's establishing that sort of everything could happen to have gone a different way. The story that's being told is the one where everything goes the right way. And, like, it's something that I've personally accepted when reading, especially, like, Chinese, like, I don't know the pronunciation, so apologies, but, like, Zhanja. It could be something, I don't know how X's are pronounced in Chinese, that's my own issue, but, like, I'm about to die. I'm not looking at my screen, but I can hear a zombie. There it is. Okay, I'm trying to type. These are two of the specifics of the genre, or two of the genres that I'm thinking of. Like these types of stories, wuxia, zhanja, it always follows. The main character is always the one who wins in the end. And whether it's through a chain of incredibly lucky encounters, scenarios, whatever, they always win. And I think what I've when I actually read those, I think what I had to try and accept was that this is just the story of that one in a trillion person, like that one person in a trillion who succeeded or was lucky enough to be the strongest ever in the end. And like I think that's what the light novel does well. What it does well is that I think the hypothetical stories at the end of every chapter basically confirm that that the story being told is the one chance where everything, like every dice rolled correctly. And if not correctly, then in a way that is the most interesting from a story perspective. Like, it makes it easier to suspend disbelief, I think, when it's just this is being told as the one timeline where everything works out. Yeah. Hang on. Now I'm gonna stop talking about this book because I think I'm devolving a little bit towards rambling. I do think it's probably one of my top 10 light novels I've ever read because it's just a fun story to read. I kind of hate that he can't see me. My chunk render distance too long, so I can see him from here, but he can't see me. Oh well, let's hope he doesn't aggro after I leave. But yeah, it's one of the top 10 other books that I've read that would probably be within the top 10. I have to say, like, Reincarnated as a Slime, which might be the whole title or there's more, I can't remember, is I think up there because it's, you know, stuff just sort of works out, but it's a happy-go-lucky story fitting the happy-go-lucky main character, with the exception of the fact that they were stabbed right at the start, but like it's just a story, it's just a happy story. It's not meant as a deep dive into the human psyche or something. So if everything just goes well, that's fine. And I find that fun. There's Kumo Desuga Nanika that is pretty fun. Is it So I'm a Spider, So What or something? I think that is a good series. I haven't read the last 2 volumes that have been released in light novel form, mostly because the second last volume that's been translated, I think as of now, just I don't care about, and so it's hard to make myself read it, because I have enough of an understanding about what happened, sort of, in the past of the world. I have enough understanding that I'm like, I don't need more info, but I don't want to skip it, so I'm just sort of stalled out, but the setting's fun, and the big sort of reveal about the main character is at least kind of okay. But it's much better in the web novel. Which, here's another brief spoiler. Anyone that doesn't know it, apologies, but I'll just say it really quick. The fact that the main character who reincarnated as a spider was actually a spider in their last life is an excellent reveal. It's very fun. But then I think the light novel kind of ruins it by having one of the humans reincarnate as a dragon. It just defeats the entire why am I a spider? Like if another person just was a dragon. That kind of ruins the justification in my opinion. I think it could have been I actually think the light novel is a little bit worse than the translated version of the web novel that I read a few years ago. For a few, like, I personally pacing reasons, but I think the web novel's pacing was a little bit better personally. It's just personal preference though. But that reveal about the fact that one of the humans reincarnated as a dragon, and there's no justification for that as far as I'm aware, is a huge letdown. That was super lame. But I still rank it pretty highly. What else? There's definitely others that I would rank highly. I can't think of them off the top of my head. Oh, it's difficult. Well, there's one that I wouldn't actually rank highly, but I kind of enjoy the setup, which is what the irregular at Magic High School. Like, I wouldn't say it's an exceptional story. It definitely has flaws, but I think the world that is built is very good. With like, it's more sci-fi than magic, despite it being all about magic. Like, I liked the fact that the world is set up as a futuristic world where they have worked to quantify magic into relatively easily reproducible like effects on the world, and it's still a relatively unique application of like it's a relatively unique world that has been built, and I think that's great. I also for terrible reasons I really am curious about the specifics. I have read spoilers for the future of the story, but like the whole relationship between the main male character and the sister is absolutely wild. And from like a source of like morbid curiosity, I'm very curious how it like I know sort of how it shakes out, but how it actually like how it all shakes out in the end. I'm very interested in just how terribly it goes. Because it's pretty questionable, but it's messy. And in a fictional story, that's entertaining. But yeah, that might be in my top 10, but I'm not sure. I really don't like vanilla Minecraft not being able to press the middle mouse button to just sort everything. That's something that I've gotten used to playing far too much modded Minecraft. Because that's almost always in every mod pack because it's so convenient. I also hate inventory management in Minecraft. It's probably one of the worst things to me. But more light novels, web novels that I enjoyed. I'm specifically thinking Japanese novels because there's a few Chinese and Korean ones that I could think of off the top of my head, but it's a very different vibe. I don't think it's really the same comparison. Um, Actually, this to smoke. Should just move this in. What am I doing? But I should try to get a wheat field set up. Oh, light novels that I've read. I've read so many, but so many light novels are incredibly forgettable. Because they just sort of aren't necessarily the most unique, and so they're easy to forget. Oh, there's one that I would not say is in my top 10, but it's pretty fun. Is like Reincarnated as a Dragon Egg that I first read, I guess, around the time that I first read the web novel version of the Reincarnated as a Slime. So I think it wasn't a latecomer to the isekai monster like story novel genre. I certainly don't think it was the first, but it was definitely not as late as I should probably just get those harvested and growing. Yeah, that one's fun. I wouldn't rate it too highly because it's just not exceptional. I mean, there's plenty of like older, like much older novels that I've tried to read that I just sort of got hung up on and just kind of got bored of. Like one that I tried to read because I'd watched part of the anime is like Campione, which is very weird. Like I think the premise is kind of fun. Not really the premise, but like the collecting powers is always a fun basic premise for a story. It's easily mediocre, and I think this one was. Ooh, one that I know is good that I've never actually... I think I've read 1 or 2 volumes of it, maybe, but I've watched the main first season of the anime is a certain magical index. I've been meaning to someday actually read it, but I haven't read it yet because it's not short, and a lot of it has already been released, so it would be a lot of catch-up, which is more difficult than reading something kind of as it releases. And that's something that I should read. What are other ones that I have actually read? Oh, there's like the Realist Hero Rebuilding a Kingdom or something where there's a guy is reincarnated into a world, or no, he's summoned as a hero and then he becomes the king and rebuilds it, which it could be kind of lame, but, and here's another spoiler for 30 seconds, the fact that the justification for him instantly being made hero, the king, is the queen has a power to travel back in time from the last moment of their life or whatever. The story does a good job of justifying him becoming the king incredibly quickly. I think that is fun. Does it take away from the magic of the story a little? Maybe. But it's still, it does a good job of justifying what would otherwise be wild coincidences. Other novels that I've read. I grab this and look through as I do this. It's kind of difficult to do because Minecraft needs 2 hands unless you're using a controller. Ooh, a recent one that's been being released is what? Secrets of the Silent Witch? Secrets of the Silent Witch, which is kind of, it's a little bit lame, but one thing that helps it, I'm not a talkative person in general, so like I can relate with not being talkative, but like I don't think the story is just set up as like a, I guess maybe the term would be pity party for people who are shy, introverted, whatever. Like, it makes it clear that not talking, being overly, unhealthily shy or introverted can be a problem, while not like saying, oh, you're a terrible person for doing this, for being like this. Like, it doesn't do that. But it's not just a story that's like, oh, introverts are the best, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't do that, which I think is good. It could easily devolve into that, but as of now, it hasn't. And, like, most of the characters in the story are, like, trying to help the main character get better at, you know, dealing with other people. And there is sort of in-world justification for why the character is as shy as they are. Because I'm a shy person. I do not enjoy talking to people that I don't know past a certain point. But even from, like, childhood, my parents helped me understand very quickly that even if you're shy, if, like, just doing your best to just sort of get by, like, if people talk to you, talk back in a reasonable way, like, just that will draw far less attention to you. So, like, you can get by with that, but this character does not have that knowledge, and the fact their fear of people stems from other things. It's not just they're a shy person. It hasn't been explicitly stated, but like, well, no, this has been explicitly stated, but like their father was burned at the stake, I think, as like a heretic because they were researching, I don't know, forbidden magic or whatever, and like that goes a long way to justify their extreme fear, such that it doesn't feel unreasonable that they're as afraid as they are. And like, obviously different people have different comforts, but like there's a certain degree of you need to be able to get past it, which would be frustrating in a fiction character if there wasn't a justification for not being able to so much as speak with people even in a one-on-one or type setting. So the story justifies it. That's a fun one. I wouldn't rank it anywhere near the highest of stories that I've read, but it's pretty fun. Other ones that I've read, I've mentioned Ascendance of the Bookworm. I think it's one of the best, like, it did the best job establishing the world that it was set in. It does a great job building its world, and I think that is important. And there's plenty of silly, like, very goofy romance type things that I've read. Oh, there's one that I've read like a year ago. It's been like 6 months since I've read it because it's kind of lost interest in the plot, but Dahlia in Bloom is kind of fun. It's not the best, and like one comment that I've seen about it online was how like one of the primary like points of the story initially was the female lead was going from being controlled by their fiance to an extreme degree to having freedom, but they instantly started going along with what everyone else was telling them to do afterwards. But while I can agree that that's kind of what happened, it is also the people telling her what she should probably do were doing it mostly in her best interest. It's a little bit less iffy, but I can understand that complaint for sure. Because, like, she wanted to just be a tool maker, but then people managed to talk her into running her own business and whatever. And, like, that's kind of not optimal, but it's fun. I think the romance is kind of what I am assuming will develop into a romance is kind of a shame, because it could have been interesting if it actually just if none of these stories that I've read that start off with the main female character and the main male character start off as friends, and they're like, we'll stay friends. They almost never do. If this story maintains them staying as friends, that would be ideal. That's not where it feels like it's going, and I think that's a shame. I think it would be a lot more interesting if the story actually just kept them as friends. I think that would be far more interesting, because it's not done all that much, where the female character and male character just are friends. It's done. It should be done more. I think they're just friends, and they don't need to find someone to date, marry, whatever. And I wish it wasn't pretty clear that they're gonna just end up together. Shoot, I miscounted. Because the fact they're just gonna end up together in the end is it's fine. The characters are nice to each other. It's mostly like wholesome, so it's not that bad, but I just want one of these stories where they're like, I just want to be friends, and they actually do just stay friends. It would be unique for a story of this genre. But I mean, the genre is clearly romance, so romance has to happen. That it's a fun story. Probably not one of my top 10, but considering I can't even think of a top 10, it might be in my top 10. One that I read once is a single novel, I Want to Eat Your Pancreas. It's a wild title, but that's the type of titles that really work. They're titles that you don't feel awkward saying out loud, which is there's so many light novels that I would not want to say the title of out loud. Not even because the contents of the title are weird, but just because it's just a whole sentence. But like, the title I Want to Eat Your Pancreas grabs the attention, and it kind of fits with the story being told, and it has emotion to the title instead of just being a description. Yeah. I've read it once. I've really been meaning to reread it, but I have to be in a very specific mood to read it because it's so sad. Like it's not a happy story that I can just read whenever. So I need to be in like a sort of maybe it's melancholic mood, maybe is the word. Maybe that's the mood I'm thinking of. But like if I'm happy and I read it, it would make me not happy, and that would kind of be suboptimal. So I have to be in a specific mood to read it, and I have not been in that mood for several months since I picked it up again. I originally read like a fan translation of it, but then I saw that it had been officially translated and kind of had to buy it, because just out of like respect for the story, it's very compelling as a story. It's very good. It's definitely in my top 10, just as a well-written story. Not as a story I'd want to read and reread like every couple years, well, though it's short enough that you could read it in a night, so you could reread it regularly, but it's all about being in the correct mood. It's very good. I've been meaning to read, I think the abbreviation is Origairu. I've been meaning to read that, but also the main character, while it is funny, is kind of insufferable. Like, moments of comedy with like his initial essay about high school life is kind of fun. But like, he's not a good person. And he isn't totally meant as a good person, but he's also not a terrible person. He's just kind of mentally crushed. What have I been reading? Or what have I read? I'm trying to... It's like a weird something or other word master that is only interesting because word-based magic is kind of funny. But it's not a very good book. Not exceptional in any real way. But it's not the worst book. I mean, the joke about, oh, writing in a different language to use magic more efficiently, it's kind of, I think as of now, it's kind of overdone. But it's not the worst. I'm doing this because supposedly if seeds are side by side with the same type, they grow more slowly. I don't know if it's true. Looking through the books that I have on my e-reader, there's plenty that I've never actually, like Overlord's another one that I think I should try to read because it's interesting as a setup, but it's far from the best. No, and actually, on the concept, on the idea of interesting but far from the best, Kuma Bear is pretty funny. Not like ha ha ha, the funniest story ever funny, but the name is funny. It's a gag story, so it's not even meant to be taken seriously, so the fact that it's super basic kind of works in its favor. But it's a fun story. Probably not in my top 10 just by virtue of the fact that it's not really... it's not much of a story. Like, it's sort of just built around moments that are kind of... It's mostly just a joke story, I think. It's not bad. There's the unwanted undead adventurer that has somewhat appealing world building. Not the most memorable, considering I can't state anything. I can't remember anything specific about said world building. But it has, I think, interesting world building with like how the world exists and like vampires and such within the story. Definitely not top 10, but it's fun to read. There's so many incredibly generic books that I've tried reading, read a volume or two of, and then never read again because they are just so generic. Goblin Slayer I've been meaning to read. It was a fun anime. And I think I read a scanlation of the manga, but I haven't gotten around to reading the novel. But it's a pretty interesting setup of like, it is set up as the world is just a tabletop role-playing game being played by the gods. Yeah, that's a fun setup. It's not a key plot point, so that kind of differentiates it from the min-maxing TTRPG story. Oh no, this goes in here. Like the fact that it's the fact that the world is a story, is a game for the god, is not a central part of the story. It's just it's just an overarching context, which is fun, but kind of limits it to some extent. Yeah, see, that's probably most of the ones that could even slightly contend for the top 10. There's The Angel Next Door Spoils Me Rotten is kind of fun. It's not the best. I would say it's pretty iffy overall, but it's fun to read, so it's not bad. I haven't read the most recent volume because I want to reread the other stuff, but it's not a fun enough read to actually reread it again, which is kind of a negative, but yeah, that's like the most recent one that I've read. But it's fun. Yeah. What would I do next in Minecraft? What do I need to do? The wheat can be used as bread or to breed cows. So I have food is there. I need to get to the nether. Anything other than the nether that I need to do? It's been a while. But I can't honestly think of what needs to be done. I mean, I need torches. That is definitely for sure the case. I can keep a stack of this and a bunch of wood with me when I go down mining. I guess the plan is I should go mining, get obsidian, do the whole nether portal jazz. I have enough food to maybe not worry about getting more food until then. I could maybe try and set up some basic farming related stuff, like go search. I hate it. Go searching for bamboo and set up. Actually, do I have enough redstone? I might have enough redstone. I could set up a basic automatic bamboo farm. That might be worth doing. I hate when stuff like this gets done, like... I really wish they'd made it so that when creepers explode it worked like TNT, where all the blocks are guaranteed to drop, but oh well. Okay, to bed I go. There's a lot more mobs than I thought there were supposed to be, but maybe that's hard mode? I don't know. Bedtime. I think this is where I stop for today. And tomorrow I might be back to either Minecraft or very potentially another game. But I'll decide before then, and I'll figure out what I'll talk about then. I'll figure out what I'll talk about before then. Goodbye. Be back.